and welcome to Rage Against the Dark Arts. It's been a little while. I've been taking a lot of time to, I guess, it's just normal life, kids, work commitments, and all that sort of thing. But really, in between, just taking a lot of time to thinking about various things and sort of diving in deeper and just sort of seeing like where are some areas that we can be effective and also like trying to understand and like wrap my head around, yeah, like what are the points that we can make? How do we move things forward legally? And I think that a really big part of that is reporting and finding out like where we can report things that happened, things that we experienced ourselves. Because I think it really does come down to if we're going to push this movement forward is, you have to do things that way, I feel like. And Mona is my guest today. She is someone who talks about crimes in Scientology. She has a channel called Scientology Crimes. And yeah, Mona, you really are someone who got me thinking about. There was a video that you did. There was a live that you did with a few people who were kids in Scientology, and
hmm
I think that was like late last year. And it was just such an incredible live stream. And one of the things that you brought up is like reporting crimes. And my takeaway from that conversations, well, one of my takeaways, because it was a really incredible conversation. Actually, my one of my favorite parts was when you spoke with Liz Gale, and I want to have a chat with her and do a live with her at some stage soon because I just think the way that she talks about the child development side of things is really interesting. But my
Sure.
other takeaway from that live is like I started thinking like, okay, what haven't I been looking at? Like, what am I missing, or are there things that I can report that I hadn't considered? And that's where I sort of was wanting to like, yeah, I started going into sort of deeper and like, what does this mean, and what's that, and is this something that can be reported, and that sort of thing. And I know that you've been looking at this for a while, and so I really appreciate your knowledge and experience, and also the encouraging people to report, because I think that's really important. So thank you, Mona, and welcome to my channel today.
Oh, well, thank you for having me. I always enjoy being with such a beautiful and intelligent woman. So, what a warrior you are.
Wow.
And just love talking with you and love being with you because I learned so much from you too. So, thank you
Oh,
so
wow,
much
that's
for
good.
having me.
Well, you're very welcome. No, I feel like I learn so much from you. I also just, it's your interest, like your level of interest that is encouraging to me. Like it's the energy that you put in to things yeah, I don't know, it pushes me more. Um, to look at things a bit harder. And so today we're going to talk about a couple of topics really circulating around labor and child labor, and we'll see where we go to. But yeah, it'll be great to have your. Yeah, I think you have a lot more knowledge about this stuff than I have. And particularly, I don't live in the US and you do as
Right.
well. And so I think generally you're going to be more familiar with those laws. And I also didn't grow up was what would happen is like as a child growing up in Scientology is they wouldn't tell you what the laws are. So you were very much uninformed and and undereducated. And so sometimes it takes a long time, like even after getting out of that system, to realize exactly like what laws were violated, etc. And the other thing is as well, because you grew up being told like never to report to authorities, there is kind of like this thought block that goes on that kind of prevents you from looking at it like that. Do you know what I mean? And so sometimes it's not until someone
True.
says to you like, oh hey, you could report that. Then you like maybe the first person says it. Maybe after 3 times you hear it, and you're like, oh, they were saying something about that. Maybe I should look at that. And what I'm hoping to encourage is that when we see a survivor of Scientology come out, maybe they come onto a YouTube channel and tell their story. Obviously, like support them and encourage them. But I think one of the things we could do is maybe look at their story and go, hmm, what about if I look at what the laws are that would apply to that situation, and maybe I can inform that person, and I can maybe send them a
Hmm.
link, or even just put in the comment and say, put a comment on that video and say, hey, just wondering if you've looked at this, da 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 da. This law was in place at that time period that you said that that occurred to you. So, and just an encouragement for them to report and informing them, and because like don't assume that we know things, I guess, is the thing that I
Right.
want to say, because largely we don't, or I can only speak for myself, but I've been pretty uninformed, and even many years after leaving, um, I'm still just learning things now.
Well, when you grow up in it, it's business as usual, and you didn't know that it was illegal to be treated like a slave. That was just the way it was. That was everyday life. And until you're out of the situation, and then you're just so happy to be out of the situation that sometimes the legal aspect or the criminal aspect just doesn't even cross your mind. So I agree with what you're saying. Um,
Yeah, and then Mona, also there's like these degrees too of coming out of it, because maybe step one, you come out of the C organization if that's what you were in, but step two, like many of us, and myself, like I still believe that I was a Scientologist because I had been born and raised in it. I didn't know anything different, and it was so ingrained in me. So I was like, okay, well, I'm not in the Sea Org anymore, but and I was relieved at that because I'd been wanting to get out. It took me a couple of years to finally get out, but but I was like, I'm going to do the best that I can to prove my worth as a good Scientologist. And so my identity was still so wrapped up in that for several years. And it wasn't until I think I was about 26 years old that, so I come out of Sea Org at 17, and it took me till I was about 26, to realize I didn't want to, that I didn't want to do Scientology anymore, or that it wasn't for me. So
right,
then there's
right.
like, you know, yeah, and then I as well, like, I mean, I think you want to at some stage like move forward with your life. Um, and but what I just wanted to say is, like, I think that there's really easy ways to report, that I didn't previously know about, because actually a lot of these websites just have a contact form that you can literally just take a few minutes and fill it
Right.
out. These are, and it's so simple and easy, and then you'll get contacted maybe in a couple weeks. I'm not sure how long these take, but at least you've put something in to say, hey, this happened to me from this time period to this time period. This is what I experienced, and it becomes a record that they have to follow up on that. And I think that's, as a minimum, because it's such an easy thing to do. I think we could encourage people to do that.
And when more and more people put in those tidbits of information in just those quick reports, it creates a bundle of cases or claims, and they may not be typical labor claims. We're going to talk a little bit more about that as we get going. But when they receive so many of them, then they go, whoa, wait a minute, there's a pattern and a trend. So what's this pattern and trend and
Mm-hmm.
what's going on here? And so it sends up red flags.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm wondering as well, just to throw this out there, and this is a bit of a gray area for me, but I'm wondering too, because sometimes, like, when we know of stories, etc., or like in that case where someone does come out and tells their story, on YouTube, and let's say, my question is, can someone like an observer, can they also report, through one of these contact forms? And I think because the contact form is kind of more informal, I think that you can, like, there's nothing, what I'm trying to say is, like, there's nothing stopping a person from doing that, I guess is what I wanted to say. Like, whether that becomes
No,
a valid
most of those,
report down the track.
yeah, most of those forms, if you're doing it as a person looking into the situation, it didn't exactly happen to you. A lot of those are usually in the immigration or the the agriculture or the trafficked areas where you
Mm-hmm.
can put those reports in. So yes, you can, but
Yeah.
um, most of the time they're probably expecting individual accounts, like
Yeah.
Mirriam writing in saying this happened to me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely, because really they can't move forward unless they have a foundation of victim reports, basically. So that's the person who actually experienced it. But I think that I think that saying, like, I observed this, I think the value in it is that it would draw attention to the situation. Do you know what I mean? And that there's public interest in a situation. And I think that the power, like, just the power. I love this saying that the power is with the people. And sometimes we feel so hopeless. I see this in a lot of the comments. Like, what can I do? I feel so helpless. Like, children have been affected. How can they get away with it? And that kind of thing. And I don't know. I think like having these conversations like we'll have today, and I hope to have more conversations as we go and as we learn and as I learn. I think that what I'd like to do is to be bringing in things that are more practical of like what people can do, or because at the very least they
Mm-hmm.
can encourage somebody else to report. So if they even like if they want to keep some quick links on their like saved in their phone or something like that, and if there's someone who watches a lot of these Scientology focused channels, then they can, like, let's say they have a human trafficking link and they have a link for child labor and they have a link to report child abuse and that sort of thing. Maybe then they can, when they come across a video with someone giving that kind of testimony, then they can say, hey, I'm just wondering, have you ever considered reporting here? Hey, I
Right.
just noticed that this da 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 da. And I think that if we can generate that kind of atmosphere, I think that's going to really turn the wheels. I think if we don't do that, I think there's missed opportunity because time goes by and we have statute of limitations on certain things. And I think that the more
Mm-hmm.
we can encourage reporting in that gentle, encouraging way of survivors, then maybe we can, make some movements. There's still so much to tackle. Yeah.
Sure, it's like having more acknowledgement and when somebody is talking to a new person coming out of Scientology or just coming forward with their story, and then do gentle suggestions. Hey, do you know that what you're talking about truly was child labor law violations, or it truly was human trafficking? Here's a link. And just something as even as simple as that in the chats. That's a great idea.
Mm-hmm. And I think even just like as a person receiving that in that way, I think that can be healing too, just to even have someone like acknowledging like, hey, did you know that that's a crime that was committed against you? Like, I don't know, there is something healing in that because like social recognition of harm is really important to the healing of a survivor. We absolutely see that in regards to sexual assault, but I think any kind of crime or victim of a crime, I think there is healing when a society recognizes like how that person was harmed. And there is something very like tangible in the way that it's a law, because law is black and white. Do you know what I mean? So it's not just
Hmm.
about feelings, it's about facts. When
Hmm.
someone says like, hey, I recognize that this was violated, this crime, da da da. And so I think that that's healing. So even I just think the more that people can do that, I think we're going to, um, when people say, like, I just want to, how can I help? I think that even just doing that is going to be helpful, regardless, even if the person never reports it. Do you get what I mean?
Exactly. And it's completely up to them. One of the things that I learned the hard way a long time ago is that, and I say this a lot, a sad story is just a sad story without the evidence and without the facts. And when you um, are ready as a person or a victim or somebody that has been a crime's been against them, when you're ready, if you're ever ready, but at least it gives you the opportunity to know, one, it's valid, and two, that you could have possible recourse. So it gives them an idea, it gives them hope, it gives them information. So whether they do anything with it ever is completely up to them.
Yeah, totally. I love that. Yeah. That's definitely what we want to do. Yeah. And like you said, like it's up to them. So, we can't tell someone you need to report this, and that's why I say gentle encouragement because, yeah, informing someone is supporting them, is helping them. So,
Mhm.
so yeah, and then whether they do that or not, again, that's up to them. But yeah, we'll just do what we can, I guess, is the motto.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. So thanks for everyone for jumping in with us. Just a quick few hellos. We've got Laura FM. Thank you, lovely, for joining us. We absolutely adore you. And we've got T Pro Scientology Audit. Thank you, lovely. So good to have you guys here. And Amanda Beaumont is just amazing. She is I don't know how she does it, but she is here when I need her, and she is absolutely amazing. So I'm so grateful. And then we've got your channel here, Fat Grammy. Say hello.
Yeah,
And
we are linked in here.
yeah, Abuses of Scientology. Yeah, Abuses of Scientology. Thanks so much. And she says, thank you for your advocacy, Mona. Yeah.
Thank you,
Um,
Abuses of
she
Scientology. I
is
have a
a
few clips of videos that I need to watch from her that was recommended to me today. So I'm gonna do that tonight.
oh, beautiful. Beautiful. Yeah, it is. It's so, I don't know, it's uplifting, empowering to see people that are interested in what's happened and what is continuing to happen. And yeah, so thank you. Leanne Tiffany, thanks so much for joining us. Joe Bananas, hello, thank you and welcome. James Smith, Afila, hello. All right, so let's get into we'll start getting into the meat of it, I guess. And Mona's going to help me out because she knows a lot more about this stuff than I do. So the first thing that we're going to just have a look at is, I gotta figure out how to do this again. Which one is it? This one, I think. Yeah. Okay, so the Fair Labor Standards Act, FLSA. The Fair Labor Standards Act, FLSA of 1938, defines and prohibits the employment of oppressive child labor in the United States. So this act is the act that governs labor for this is the federal law about labor across the US. The Fair Labor Standards Act. So the act establishes a general minimum age of 16 years for employment in non-hazardous occupations and a minimum age of 18 years for employment in any occupation determined by the Secretary of Labor to be hazardous to the health or well-being of minors. However, children younger than 16 may work if certain conditions are met, and rules for agricultural and non-agricultural employment vary significantly. And 14 and 16 year olds may work in some occupations, not manufacturing and mining, but this must not interfere with their schooling and must not be done in conditions which would interfere with their health and well-being. Children who are 13 years old and younger are not permitted to be employed at all. Violations of the above are deemed as oppressive child labor. Now, Mona, you wanted to add something and to try and also, yeah, like if you can give us some context, like in terms of how does this apply or not apply in a religious, quote, religious setting. Yeah.
Absolutely. For first of all, the Fair Labor Standards Act applies to 14 and older. Any child under 14 is not supposed to be employed Now, in a mom and pop shop, a mom and dad could hire their 10-year-old to work. In a family situation, a family business, that's completely okay. However, we're not talking about family businesses here. We're talking about a religious organization that is a nonprofit, a 501c3 nonprofit. The Fair Labor Standards Act, the rules still apply in what a child can and can't do. So no matter if they're working for a 501c3 nonprofit or a for-profit business, you still, even in the hotel setting, I'm going to get to it, Serge. I promise. Hey, Power Lies. Um, is the conditions still need to be met. So let's look at the correlation of FLSA, which means that a 14-year-old can't be using a steamer, can't be using a power washer, can't be up on a ladder to staple or to use nail guns. A 14-year-old may not be doing that. A 16-year-old may not be doing that. So the correlation here is what they can and can't do. They can't be using harsh chemicals in a cleaning in the hotel setting. They are not supposed to be driving a vehicle until they're 16, and then they're still not supposed to be driving unless their insurance company would cover it. And yeah, go figure, that's not ever happening, right? To have a 16-year-old driving in your business. So
Mm-hmm.
FLSA applies in that respect. But we're going to correlate it a little bit over to Scientology did, like Scientology does, figures out a way around the system and a loophole. And what they did is they don't have employees, they have religious volunteers. Now, the religious volunteers still need to obey the conditions of employment or volunteering. Those volunteers still have to use the what they can and can't do between agriculture and non-agricultural labor. If I'm going too fast or if I'm going over your head, say question or stop, and I'll
Mm-hmm.
stop. But they got around it and they started they label everybody a religious volunteer. So they don't have to pay them, they're volunteers. Now, under federal law, under the Department of Labor, religious volunteers, there isn't a there isn't an age. So actually you could have a 5-year-old as a volunteer helping, working, doing things. They still have to meet those conditions. They still can't use harsh
Okay.
chemicals or use inappropriate equipment, stuff like that. But there isn't an age limit under the Department of Labor for volunteers. Now, most organizations have age limits for volunteers. Most volunteers are 18 and over because there are conditions for volunteers, especially in the religious setting, that one, you have mandated reporters. You can't be a mandated reporter under 18. And again, I'm going to kind of walk through different scenarios and different things that OSA, if you're listening, you may want to go, take care of this because you could be under indictment for this. But so the religious volunteers, what type of jobs did kids do in Scientology, Mirriam?
Okay, so the setting that I grew up in was like in the within the inner core. So I'm just saying that just like there are some variations in what children experience in terms of like labor and what they were required to do in different locations and in different settings. So what I was in from 6 years old when I arrived into the U.S., I was placed in what was called the cadet org, which is not really an appropriate word for it. It was more a child labor camp, which is to say that we were placed there as like a holding facility until we were old enough to then start learning and so children were placed there, like babies, toddlers, children. As I said, I was 6 years old. My younger brother was 3 years old. My older brother was 7. And so, well, no, actually, he hadn't turned 7 yet. Anyways, we're that close in age. But yeah, so we arrived there, and that was just like, as I said, like a holding facility type of thing. Then as we start learning to read, so by 7 I start learning to read and some basic like learning numbers and how to count and stuff like that, then my education gets more like Scientology's, more Hubbard language, that sort of thing. By like 8 years old, I'm starting to practice Scientology practices, and then at that stage I'm being trained for labor, so trained to produce labor for Scientology, and that is being groomed in various different ways. And that also is the age where I start to do so they would have us do like missions, for example. So it would be like a set thing that you would go into one of the organizations, one of the buildings, and then you would do like all their filing for them or sort their promotional materials or something like that. And then there was, and so so basically I'm saying it's like on a scale, it would gradually increase. Then at 11 years old, I was then sent to the ranch, in California, the ranch school in Santa Clarita, Saugus, California. And upon arrival, I was assigned, everyone gets assigned a position. And so, that would determine what work you were doing, for example. So at one stage, I was in charge of all the laundry. So I would go to all the dormitories and collect up all the laundry, carry that down to the commercial, washer dryer, do a laundry, bring it back, we'll fold it all, bring it back, etc. Then later I was working in the galley, which is a full commercial sized kitchen. And I was doing washing all the pots. I was pots in charge. So I was 12 years old and I was pots in charge. So that means after every meal, I was washing all the pots that were used to feed all the children. And at that stage, I think we had maybe 150 kids there, roughly. I think it increased because more kids came up after that. But yeah, so I did that for quite a while. And then from there, and then when I was 13, I was sent down to Los Angeles to do, again, one of these missions. But now, see, the missions were getting bigger and harder. And in fact, I arrived there and we were taken to, it was me and a group of other kids, and we were taken to the AOLA building, which is one of the blue buildings.
Okay, Mirriam,
Yeah.
stop. So up until then, we're not talking about child labor, we're talking about child abuse. Straight up.
Okay, that's what I wanted to determine. Yeah.
Yeah. So up until you're 14, that's considered child abuse.
Okay.
I mean, normal chores, okay, but not labor.
Yeah, this was full blown, like that this was your job that you held and you were responsible. And actually you had statistics which you were judged by. So then you were either rewarded or penalized accordingly. So you had things that would be taken away from you. So for example, everyone got to watch one movie on a TV screen, in a classroom. So everyone would crowd in there, and you only got to watch that one movie if your statistics were up. So in other words, if you had produced more this week than you had the previous week. But not only that, you would have had to achieve a white glove pass on cleaning your dormitory as a group, and then also second to that, a common area. So for example, a classroom. So on the back of having achieved a greater production than you had the previous week, cleaned your living quarters to a white glove pass, and also a common area such as a classroom to a white glove pass. Then, so this is an all day activity from morning until night. And then at nighttime, you get to watch this one movie only if you have achieved all those things. So you could be excluded if you're on the list of the naughty, basically the naughty list. which often I was excluded. And so that's why I remember it. But yeah, so anyhow, so that all occurring. And then this particular mission that I was sent down, I was kept in Los Angeles for several months, doing this mission that first started off as doing renovating, which is literally we were given like sledgehammers to knock down walls in this building because it was being completely gutted out, and then it was going to be renovated. So that went on. Basically, we were sent there specifically to do that gut out project of that level of that one particular floor of the AOLA building. Once that was done, then they then took us over to when we were starting at the Anthony building, and they took us over to, or maybe at One Stage Complex, anyways, around those blue buildings, and they took us over to on Hollywood. There is another building there, not the HGB, but there's like the Author Services building. Anyways, they put us in this hallway that was just like stacked high with all these materials, and we had to create like in the binders and that for the golden age of tech, and that went on for months. And so in the meantime, I was like, I don't want to be here. I know I'm missing out on education. Like I'm 13. I don't even know basic math. Like I need my schooling and education, and they wouldn't let me go back to the ranch. They just wanted to keep me there to do this labor. And yeah, even at one stage I tried to get on the bus and they kicked me off the bus, and they just
So
literally refused. Yeah.
looking at what you just described, and you're under 14, and I need for you, because I've heard other people, they had to go in and clean hotel rooms, they had to do laundry,
Yeah.
they had to do people's, the food service, they had to help cook, wash
Yes.
the pots, the
Mm-hmm.
medical liaison, wasn't Laura a medical liaison, all before
Yes.
these ages. Can you please reread
Yes.
reread your slide here?
14 and 16-year-olds may work in some occupations, not manufacturing and mining, but this must not interfere with their schooling and must not be in conditions which would interfere with their health and well-being. Yes, children who are 13 years old and younger are not permitted to be employed at all. Violations of the above are deemed as oppressive child labor. Yeah, and
So volunteers and people there have to mimic the FLSA, and
as a standard, right.
there you go. Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. Okay, that makes sense. So then, yeah, so then on from there, and like you said, I mean, I saw children being brought into the Sea Org as young as 10 and 11 years old. So then I was placed in the Sea Org. So then I do eventually, it's a bit of a story, but I basically stepped on a piece of glass that ended me up in the hospital. And so then they had to send me back to the ranch because they couldn't have an injured child and make them do labor, right? But when I arrived at the back at the ranch, they then just literally like the next day came out, day or two later came out with this whole new thing that they were going to do, the ethics and correction group, which is basically what is again another. It was like basically it was designed off of the RPF, so that was like it was like very specifically like a labor group,
Right.
where it was a punishment camp basically, or like we were already at a ranch. It was a punishment group basically, and so they were making us run, even though I had stitches in my foot, and dig trenches and all the rest of it. So on and on, I guess. Then, but still at 13, then I get put into the CU organization, and then and as well a bunch of other kids, and that had been happening for years, of course. Like so a kid at the ranch, for example, would just like disappear, and you just wouldn't know, and then you'd hear like, oh, they were put in the Sea Org, like they were I they just like a kid would just go missing, you know, or their bed would still be made in the morning, and you'd be like, oh, I wonder where, such and such is, and then you find out like they've been taken to LA to be in the Sea Org. So anyway, so from 13 years old, I was in the Sea Org, and so now this is where this is a scenario that happened to many children at this stage. So by this stage, it's 1998, and many kids were placed into what was called like the TTC, or the Technical Training Corps. And I think that it was a way around those labor laws as well, because they were like,
Mhm.
oh well, they're not doing labor, they're studying, right? But if
Mhm.
you look at the Fair Labor Standards Act, and what's deemed as oppressive child labor, if you're being denied an education, if you're being denied your schooling, and you're not being able to attend proper schooling hours and that sort of thing, and if it interferes with your health and well-being, then it's a problem. Like, so yeah, I'm interested in your take on that. Like, were the kids that were put into this auditor training, and yeah.
Sure. So I've got a lot more information about the auditing part of it and auditor training and all of that. We'll get to that point. I promise, Serge, because this is like way heavy on my heart. I promise, I promise. But for the 14 and 15-year olds, 14 and 15-year-olds for FLSA, they're only allowed to work 3 hours a day. I think it's 18 or 20 a week. It's not full time, it's only part time, and it can't interrupt the schooling. That's FLSA. But volunteering is different. Volunteering, as long as somebody is saying that you're going to school, there's no there's no law there for volunteering. A 14 or a 15 or a 16 or a 17-year-old can be volunteering 100 hours a week if if their mom and dad is still saying they're going to school, and if their
Mm.
education isn't being disrupted, and it's all hearsay. Now, let's
Mm-hmm.
say a court case comes up and they say, look, I was doing Sea Org for 100 hours a week and I wasn't getting my schooling, and here's the documentation of that. That's different, because then a judge could
Mm-hmm.
adjudicate that. But
Okay.
but for volunteering, there's no check and balance. So this is how they're getting around it. And then of course they're giving you a stipend. Let's go to the Sea Org now. You're in there, you're doing labor. Um, we've gone away from the child abuse. Now we're going into the child labor. Okay. And the child labor is they don't employ you. You're not listed as an employee. So there's no Bureau of Labor statistics.
Mm-hmm.
There, all it is they're giving you a stipend. And they're saying, yeah, we have so many volunteers. They're not probably even listing at the age. They're not saying we have 100 14-year-olds and 500 19-year-olds. That's not a statistic. So that could be a good legislative action, is to report
Mm-hmm.
those volunteer statistics in under the BOL, the Bureau of Labor, BOLS. And so what they're doing is they're getting around that by using a stipend method, or if you join staff for 2.5 or 5 hours, excuse me, 2.5 or 5 years, they pay you kind of like a multi-level marketing scheme, to where you're not even getting a 1099, which is the form that you receive for a non-employee dividend
Okay.
money. They do it funky, to where it's kind of like, somebody explained it to me. You buy the services from them, you sell the services for an upgraded cost, and then you give those services back, and the only thing that you're keeping is the profit. So it's a total cloak and dagger, but it's a runaround, it's a scam. But
Mm.
it's a way to get away
Okay.
from having employees. They don't have employees under the CSI and
Mm.
RCT. They only have volunteers that they pay stipends, and then they have their staff, which they get their
So
commissions. I
Mona,
think it's like Go ahead.
So just to understand that, I think, like, just so I'm getting it, so that it's not classed as like commerce, like commercial transactions, because there's a transfer of money. That's what you're talking about, where they basically like change it as it goes, so that it's not, so that there is in fact a donation and it's not a commercial transaction. Is that like what I'm understanding?
It, yes and no. It's like a multi-level marketing scheme
Okay.
for that part of it. Now, to be real honest, when you pay that money back, I'm kind of curious. I have no evidence of this, but I'm kind of curious as to when they pay the service back for the staff, of
Mm-hmm.
whether they're marking that off to the IRS as a donation back to the church.
Okay, so that's
I
interesting. So
think we
yeah,
got some double
I pay.
dipping going on.
Oh, I'm sure. So you're talking about
Uh,
the freeloader debt,
nope,
is that right?
nope.
Oh, you're
I'm
just
talking
talking about
about
for
this
staff? Hmm.
for staff. So staff get a commission.
Okay.
Let me give you an example. Staff get a commission for
Okay.
selling a block of services. Is that what it's called?
Yep.
A block of courses. So
So
they
a block of it's an intensive, which is a certain
they're
set amount of hours that they're selling for these sessions.
thank
Yeah.
you. Okay, so an intensive.
Yeah.
So, and I'm going to throw a number out there because I don't know how much they cost. But let's say they cost $1,000.
Mm-hmm.
They the church sells it to me for $900. I sell it for $1,000, and then I return the services back to the church for a refund of $900, and I just only get to keep the $100. So that's
Oh,
a way to
okay.
get around buying and selling and 1099ing. It's
Oh, okay, okay.
the old vacuum sales trick. That's
Wow.
how they're getting around that. And then the other parts of it, you have the staff and then you have the Sea Org. The Sea Org they're not employees. They're not covered under true labor standards. Just the requirements of the conditions is the same. The pay, because they're not employees, they're not covered under labor standards. They are covered under religious workers, religious volunteers,
Mm-hmm.
and they just receive a stipend, kind of like a priest. A priest probably gets his expenses paid and gets a house and a car. It's a stipend. Um, he may get meal tickets. He may get something like that. The religious
Okay.
volunteer, that's what they get.
Okay.
So, so let's kind of walk through that just a little bit, though. So they're doing the same type of jobs. Um, it, they have. Let me pop open. You're not going to be able to see it, but I can read it.
Okay.
Um, I have it marked here. Told you I have a zillion of these damn things open.
Mm-hmm. I love it. While you're looking for that, oh, sorry, just one sec while you're looking for that, what I might do
Sure.
is just if we finish this one up and just here. So the Fair Labor Standards Act, is administered by the U.S. Department of Labor through the Wage and Hour Division. And a report can be made by calling this number, 1-866-4-US-WAGE, or by using their online contact form. So again, I really love these online contact forms because I feel like they're just so easy to do. And it's just a matter of just filling out your details and doing like a brief summary. And I think even what you could do is maybe for people who have experienced this, and maybe they've experienced a number of things like across like child labor, human trafficking, and that sort of thing. maybe they could write out like a timeline of things that they had experienced and just sort of have that on hand so that when they need to report on one of these things, they can sort of just copy and paste over. Like, this year I was doing this, da 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 da. I don't know. And I think that's helpful. And one of the things I was going to say is that, like, just, I also just want to create some understanding around that procrastination is actually a trauma response, like the not wanting to do that and the putting it off, and and so that's why, just getting back to like being like gentle and encouraging, because sometimes we maybe need to be reminded like 6 or 7 times, and then little gentle encouragement will maybe get us there, because this is could be quite daunting, and it's like you got like a lot of memories resurfacing. But I think just the fact that it's just a simple contact form, I feel like, is the least intimidating method of doing it. Do you know what I mean? Like, yeah. So I just wanted to just comment on that. Yeah. Let's go back to you, Mona.
Okay, so I did find the form here. Just some of the same things that you would just, people must be at least 14. And this is the FLSA. Children between 14 and 15 can work 3 hours on a school day and 18 hours during the school week. Youths between 14 and 15 can work up to 8 hours on a non-school day or 40 hours on a non-school week. So like on breaks or spring break. There's some job
Right.
limitations. A 14 or 15-year-old can only work between 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. And workers 16 and 17 can work unlimited hours, but cannot work hazardous jobs. There is such a thing as called the Volunteer Protection Act. The Volunteer Protection Act starts when you're 18, not under 18. A volunteer, an organization cannot replace normal jobs, normal paid jobs with all volunteers.
Right.
That, unfortunately, that's exactly what Scientology does with everybody. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
the whole damn organization is replaced with volunteers.
Everyone's a volunteer. Yeah, even if you're working
Everyone's a
in the
volunteer.
kitchen. Yeah, if you're yeah, exactly. If you're working in maintenance, if you're working in construction, like, you're a volunteer. Yeah, class.
Exactly. Now, okay, the problem comes in, and if you don't mind me jumping into this auditing, because it really, really, really just drives me crazy. So,
Yeah.
auditors, what would you think a percentage of the youth were auditors?
Oh, in the
Maybe
time that
not
I was
percentage, but a
there.
lot, a little.
Okay, so like there's also a part here that I also wanted to bring into the conversation too, is like there is a training period, and so there was quite a lot of kids in that training period. And now whether they might still do some of the auditor training and actually in fact do like these practice sessions and stuff like that, but then they may not make it to being an actual functioning in that role of an auditor. Then there's also, like, for example, there's the role of the examiner, who's not an auditor, but they still have to learn the meter training and all that sort of thing, like, just to so then there's also different variations with different locations. So in Los Angeles, I would say in terms of like the really, really younger kids, like 14 and under, I think they were in training. Like, I feel like mostly at the
Okay.
time that I was there. Um, and so I'm sorry, I just don't know in terms of like percentages or numbers or that kind of thing. But like, so you would have a whole organization, and then you would have this cluster of like these really, really young kids that were placed in this training. Yeah. And
Okay.
those kids at the time when I was placed in were as young as like 10 years old. Yeah.
That
But
just
that's
pisses
not,
me off.
that's, and that, I'm just saying at that particular time period in that location,
Yeah.
but you have such variation over the years prior, I mean, and even around that time, children of all different varying ages doing all different sorts of activities and things. And I mean, there was also even like 16-year-old boys being placed on the RPF That's like, and also just a side note, quick side note, like my brother, this is in Australia though, my half brother, who's older than me, my mother's first son, he was 13 years old when he was placed in the RPF in Sydney. So, do you see what I mean? Like how there's a lot of variation. I don't want to
Hmm.
like exclude anyone's experience because there was, yeah, if that makes sense.
So,
Because there were kids placed in roles that were not just training, but because I was in that's where I was placed. That's sort of what I'm visualizing because that was my experience, I guess is what I'm trying to
okay.
say. Yeah.
So the reason why I'm asking that is I know the rule now in Scientology is because I not only looked it up, but I asked, is all
Okay.
auditors must be ordained ministers. Was it like that back then?
No, I don't remember that being a rule. I don't remember that being a rule. There was the minister training had kind of been revamped and reissued around that time. I don't recall that being. But then, see, I didn't reach the higher levels of auditor training, so I could be missing information, but I
Hmm.
wasn't. Yeah, so I'm just trying to be as accurate as I can to my experience, and
That's okay.
I remember it being around, but I just don't remember it being a specific requirement. But people who did go through that level of training would be able to say yes or no. Yeah.
So now
Okay,
they
Serge
have
says
to,
no. Yeah.
okay,
Yes, it was
so
not
now they
not a
have to be
requirement. Yeah.
an ordained minister as, but now they do have to. And so the
Okay.
issue is that to be an ordained minister in most states, definitely in California and Florida, you can be an ordained minister before you're 18, but in order to be an ordained minister to do what they need to do, in order to sign documents, perform weddings, to have authority, they have to be 18 and older. Because what?
Mm-hmm.
Kids cannot consent, right? So, if they are
So then what you're
auditors,
saying really is you're saying that they can't be an auditor unless they're 18 and above. Would that be right?
it, yes, except for the fact that the auditors in my mind are doing counseling, which that's a whole nother topic. How can you be a
Mm-hmm.
counselor um, without your at least your associates or bachelors or masters? But the religious counselor can be
Right.
a religious counselor without those accreditations. But i- if somebody were to come to you to confess their sins and they were a mandated reporter, you can't be a mandated reporter until after you're 18 because kids can't consent. Do you see where that
Wow.
goes? So there's a loophole
Mm-hmm.
there that they've screwed themselves up now because mandated reporters, now the mandated reporter as a religious counselor, a priest, um, a minister, which is why they made them all do
Mm-hmm.
ordained ministers.
Mm-hmm.
They are not mandated reporter if that's in their job duty to take confessions or audits
Okay.
or ethics, or they call it they call it confessions in their wording for their issues, right? I We won't get into that, but so
Mm-hmm.
but anybody handling those folders, any of the examiners, anybody that is near that, they're still mandated reporters. And they're not reporting like they're supposed to. So even if that
Mm-hmm.
PC folder, let's say the counselor who's the religious minister doesn't have to tell, but anybody handling that PC folder, they're supposed to tell.
Mm-hmm. Let me just read
An
this
examiner,
comment from Serge. This is interesting because it's not counseling. The fact is the sessions are not anything like any counseling. Yes, absolutely. It is a data mining operation. It's felony admission fishing. It's really a interrogation. It's like a relentless interrogation. Like, you do not get out of that chair till you've answered the question satisfactorily. Like, in all the ways that an interrogation is an interrogation, it fits that definition completely. And so
I agree with that.
that's where language, and this is a really important thing, is like that's where language comes in, because language creates gray areas when they call it counseling, religious counseling, and we're like, no, we experienced it, and that's an interrogation.
Yeah.
You are not allowed to leave that room, you know what I mean, until you've reached that point where they say it's okay that you can leave. And you have to answer these very invasive questions, and not only answer the question, but describe how you did it, when you did it, go into extensive detail. Yeah, so we just wanted to clarify that
It is
definition.
all it is all verbiage. That's all it is. It's just semantics, because what they report to the IRS and to the Department of Justice and the FBI is that they are ordained ministers, reverends, and this is all counseling, and it's all religious. And no, it's
Yeah.
not. And I completely agree with that. But when they're looking at as a religious organization, and don't throw shit at me, Serge. Don't throw things at me. No tomatoes. But that's what on paper it is.
No, this is really important. This is why, Mona, this is why it's great just to contrast, right? Yeah, to contrast like the language in the law and the language that's being used to hide things. And I think that's really important to like to bring it. Yeah. So that's why this conversation is really important, to get your perspective on like, what does it say, black and white, what does it say, and where are the areas that they're skirting around it, and where to like define things so that you can use the law to prevent this from continuing to happen to people, and to also perhaps achieve justice for the past of what has happened.
Hmm. Well, and that's where they've skirted around the laws between employees and labor standards. The volunteers, as I said, still are under the requirements of who can do what. You still can't have kids using harsh chemicals. You still can't having
Right.
kids do all of that. You just can't. But
Mm-hmm.
there's documentation within the Scientology, but there isn't documentation because there is no labor statistics for volunteers for youth, because they're not supposed to be doing that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then,
Mm-hmm.
as I said, anything
Yeah.
under 14 was child abuse.
Mm-hmm. And then, so for the kids that were fortunate enough, because just going back to where I was in Los Angeles, like there were kids that were working in various areas, that would include labor, that would include, and even in some cases, like, yeah, working with commercial machinery, and doing using tools or heavy tools or that sort of thing that they're not supposed to be doing. But going back to this auditor situation, because the other thing that you mentioned was the hours, the amount of hours, so that they can work certain hours and then not certain hours. I mean, these kids were working 7 days a week. And then that would come into the conversation, right? That would come into play. If
It
they're being excluded from education and are only doing this
right.
work, then that has to be termed as oppressive child labor, in the context of like they're not an employee, they're a quote volunteer, but in terms of how the standard applies to the treatment of children.
Correct. And them getting the education, the proper and adequate education. Yes, and being denied a proper and adequate education. I mean, for
Yeah.
gosh sakes, they have a No Child Left Behind and adequate and, you know, testing, level testing. but yet
Mm-hmm.
Scientology kids can work 100 hours a week and not go to school and not get the education that they're supposed to.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that's
Yeah.
where, yeah, that's where the disconnect is between the volunteer and being labeled as a volunteer and not having the stats. I have a Bureau of Labor um, document. Let me find it here real quick.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to just kind of show you what it says. Um,
Okay, great.
so it's the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and I'm not going to pop it on the screen, but I'm just going to read. The demographics they talk about is women and men, race and ethnicity, married persons, the levels of education, volunteering by employment status, total hours spent volunteering, uh, basically names and organizations. That's it. That's what they collect on
Mm-hmm.
volunteers.
Wow.
So there's an opportunity for improvement right there. Yeah, I know my arms are messed up. Sorry.
Definitely. So it's like some of it is almost like, yeah, it's kind of horrifying. It's like the bar, there's so much work to be done to make this environment, like, to bring in safety for children um in these gray areas. It's almost like you have to bring legislation along. You have to bring, do you know what I mean? It's like
Hmm.
the I think there is some work to be done in terms of like lobbying and getting new bills passed and that sort of thing. Like that's kind of where we need to move to. Like when we talk about, um, and already there is law in place that should protect these children, but because of the language in the gray areas, it makes it difficult. But I think that I think like we'll keep going with and breaking these things down because there are definite laws that are violated and there are things that can be reported. Yeah.
There are.
Across
There are.
across the
It's
spectrum. Yeah.
Yep, correlating it with the FLSA and correlating it with the Volunteer Act. There are things that can be brought. Um,
Mhm.
Unfortunately, as I said, Scientology has found the loophole of the religious volunteers. Um, but you still can't abuse people.
Right.
Now, as I
And
said, there isn't a law saying that a 15-year-old couldn't volunteer 1,000 hours a week if there was 1,000 hours a week. I mean, there's just not a law
mhm.
there for that. But it would be
Mhm.
breaking it
But
because
if it was right.
they
But
would
if it was
be
investigated and heard in court, it would be deemed that's child abuse. Yeah.
because they're denying them of the rest of their life. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, that's right. If anything is affecting the development of a child, then that's abuse.
that's abuse.
So right. So those are the things, and that's where I bring it back to reporting, because in order to compel an investigation, it has to be reported. In order to bring something forward to be heard in the court, then it has to be reported first, and then maybe we'll hear it in the court in 5-10 years time. But if we can have these things heard in a court, then we can set precedent when decisions are made to say that,
Hmm.
and that's how we're going to move towards, like when we say kids cannot consent. I mean, we would really love to see an age of consent set for experiencing these types of practices. No one under the age of 18. Ideally, we would push that further, but if that's at a minimum, no one under the age of 18, then that would be, that would be a massive improvement. We could protect a lot of children if we were to bring that about. But I really do think it comes back to the report first, and it's going to generate these actions.
Yeah, if there's no smoke, they don't know there's a fire.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
what other organization have we heard of that has that much religious volunteers that it's actually abused? You just don't.
Hmm.
I don't know of
And
another
then
group.
right. So then that's in the context of like employee versus volunteer. Um, but actually, when you look at, and this is on another topic, is human trafficking. Human trafficking is a topic that is more broad, because you don't have to be defined as an employee or a volunteer or whatever. You can experience human trafficking if certain things, like for forced labor, for example, if certain conditions are present. And that's something that I think really deserves a whole deep dive, a whole live on its own. But just to kind of like, because we wanted to context and kind of contrast these couple of different things. So if let me jump to, we'll start. Um,
YRB says
okay.
Campus Crusade for Christ came close. Yeah, they did. But still, there's a huge jump. Scientology's, uh, if you have to give them credit for something, they really are good at disobeying the law or skirting the law.
Yeah. So this is a case that you and I both kind of seized upon. There's so many, and we've each, covered it separately, but there's so many correlations here with the experiences of kids in Scientology, particularly in that inner core C organization, but also like even at the what we call like the Scientology staff level, which is these class 5 orgs, these outer orgs, outside of the core. And this case, so this is the so it was six members of a former cult convicted of forced labor conspiracy charges in years-long scheme that included multiple minors. Now, interestingly, these offenses date back beginning in the year 2000. The year 2000 is the year that the Human Trafficking Act was put into effect.
Mm-hmm.
So that includes for forced labor. And so what that means really is that human trafficking laws in the U.S. on a federal level basically didn't come into existence until the year 2000. But it was interesting to see that this, when we talk about certain things have statute of limitations, well, these charges came back to offenses from the year 2000 onwards. And so that's where I think that there is real applicability. This case was investigated. I believe it was only recent, and I know that the
Mm-hmm.
trials were held last year and resulted in the conviction. So,
It's
so
very
the
current.
speed, it's very current, and the speed of like the investigation and all of and to trial and conviction happened actually pretty quickly, relatively speaking. So they are looking to act on these types of issues, and these people were sentenced. And actually, I was looking for the report of the sentencing report, and I couldn't find it, but it was supposed to be on the 18th of February that they were sentenced. And
I forgot
I
about
just
that.
wanted to, yeah, as I see, sentencing hearings are scheduled, and I just couldn't find anything that showed the result of it. But it gives the maximum penalties here: 20 years in prison, and then so that was for Kaba Majib, and then the rest of the defendants each face a maximum penalty of 5 years in prison. A federal district court judge will determine any sentence after considering the U.S. sentencing guidelines. So interestingly, this is the investigation was done by the FBI, so the FBI in Kansas City, with the assistance of the Department of Labor. Now, the Department of Labor is where that FLS, the Fair Labor Standards Act, FLSS, whatever the acronym is. It sits under, as I mentioned before, it sits under the Department of Labor. So
Mhm.
I just think it was interesting to note like the different departments that were involved here, and then also, so then it was
Miriam, you know what
prosecuted.
else? You know what else happened with this one? That has not
What?
happened in any other case. They lost their 501(c)(3).
Oh, as a
It has
result.
not happened on any other case yet. This was
Okay, that's
precedence.
significant. That's
It's huge.
significant. So then if we're talking about, oh, we want to, take away Scientology's tax exempt status, we want to, create these massive changes, like then it makes sense to bring it back to reporting on the things that can be reported, encouraging people to report, and that will compel these investigations, that will compel these departments to act, and then we see it in these court cases, and then we will see resulting penalties that will occur. Because so then it's not just about individual justice, it's about like that's how you create these massive changes in
Hmm.
the course of history and the outcomes for for the future. And it's interesting. So this is prosecuted by the Civil Rights Division's Human Trafficking Prosecution Unit. So that comes under the Civil Rights Division. So you have a number of these departments and divisions that are involved in these types of cases.
Yeah, I tried calling the Kansas City FBI folks that did this, and the FBI is really weird. They won't give you the time of the day. I tried.
That's all right. Well, that is
Some days I
yeah.
don't know if I'm
I think they
brave
just
or
like they'll
stupid.
no, you're very courageous and we appreciate it. And I think it does take that. It takes that, like being curious and being willing to ask questions and look at the information. And, I really appreciate the time that you spend on this type of thing because it is really important. And this really is what is going to create the outcomes that we want to see. So, in regards to this, so anyone who has information about human trafficking should report that information to the National Human Trafficking Hotline. You can call this number 1-888-373-7888. It's available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And you can also go on to the Human Trafficking Hotline. And then there's the Justice Department. So there's two things. There's a human trafficking hotline, and then there's also under the Justice Department, you can report human trafficking. So again, well, let's just take a look at that. So the National Human Trafficking Hotline, here's the information. And here it has a definition of forced labor. So forced labor is one of the types of human trafficking, and that involves the recruitment, harboring, transportation, provision, or obtaining of a person for labor or services through the use of force, fraud, coercion, or for the purpose of subjection to involuntary servitude. And I think fraud, like underline fraud there, coercion. I mean, these are definitely the things that come into play in terms of the Scientology, forced labor, human trafficking, and then also the debt bondage of like having that freeloader debt that is being stacked
Right.
against you. So then you know that when you leave, you're going to be having to pay that back. And I know a lot of people say, well, you don't have to pay it and it's not legal, but I believed it was when I left at 17 and the whole time I was in there, and so I paid it. I think I was like 18 or 19 when I paid my freeloader debt. So, and I wish I hadn't. But
Yeah, but you
uh
didn't
but yeah,
know. Yeah, you didn't know.
I didn't know, and I was still trying to
Mm.
be like a good Scientologist and all the rest of it. So, yeah, so those are some interesting things to look at, but also just in terms of the correlating things in this case too. Um which is
In the
oh,
human
okay, back.
trafficking, when they send you to a flag from the blue or from the whatever state you're at to flag or to blue, that's human trafficking.
Yep, absolutely. Okay, so then let's have a look at some of these offenses here. So, like, just underlining this one, and this is going back to that UNOI case that was successfully investigated, prosecuted, and resulted in convictions of the former leaders. It says in childhood, so this is in regards to the victims of this case. In childhood, they suffered physical and emotional abuse, were denied a proper education, and were subject to forced labor. As adults, these victims found the strength and courage to pursue justice and face their abusers. So these types of things, this physical, emotional abuse, being denied a proper education, were subjected to forced labor, and there's a number of things in this case that absolutely directly correlates with the experiences that we had in there. And so it's absolutely valid to report on forced labor in Scientology, and yeah, again, through the human trafficking hotline, you can report that. There was other things in there, like to grab a few. Okay, the defendants controlled what the victims viewed and read, how the victims dressed, how the victims addressed the defendants and others, with whom the victims communicated, where the victims went, and what the victims ate to ensure that the victim. And then so this went into a different thing that doesn't really apply. Well, they definitely
It does.
so it
Yes, it
talks about
does.
it did you're right for some like staff in some locations. So in terms of like making sure that they maintained a certain weight, they did
Hmm.
do in this, they made the victims undergo colonics, which I haven't heard of that in Scientology, but definitely there was whole areas and sections of staff that they monitored
It's
because they,
purification. The
well, that's
purification.
true. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
this
Um,
could have read
a cleansing.
instead of,
Okay. Yeah.
yeah,
I see that. Yeah. Okay. The defendants rarely permitted victims to receive outside medical attention for illness or injuries. The defendants regularly punished the victims for violating the rules. Um, and then, okay, so the defendants withheld food, prohibited victims from speaking to others for over 2 weeks. So that was always done. A punishment, there's a couple of different ways that they would do this, but you would be punished if you violated certain rules. You were not allowed to speak to your friends. You were not allowed to speak to people. Like there was a thing called the non-interpellation order. There was different things that they would do. So like you could be separated from a particular person and not be allowed to have contact with them. Or if you were segregated into a group like in the RPF, or like when I was a kid as well in that ECG, the Ethics and Correction group, then you weren't allowed to speak to. Oh, and also when you're trying to leave, when you're in the Sea Org, you get put into the certain group called the DEX, and that means that, and there you're subjected to forced labor as well, and made to do punishments, and you're segregated, and you're not allowed to tell anybody that you want to leave, and everything's restricted, and you're, yeah, so there's lots of these different things that come in. Create a climate of fear and intimidation, and also saying to the victims, like, if you leave, like, the worst is going to happen to you. So the defendants
hmm
told victims that they would burn in an eternal hellfire if they left. And then they were often told, like, if anything bad happens to somebody that had left the organization, that it was because they had left, and that was like the consequences for them. And that was definitely what we were told as well. And it made you fearful. It was like, oh, if I do leave, like, all this horrible stuff is going to happen to me. And in the end, I just had to be like, okay, but staying is worse. So this unknown bad stuff that might happen to me, like they would often say, you're gonna become a drug addict, a prostitute, like you'll wind up dead or homeless, like the worst things are gonna happen to you. And then, and you knew that you didn't have an education, so you were
right.
undereducated, underprepared for the outside world. A lot of cases, like you didn't have access to your own documents, you were brought in from other countries, so as I was. And I didn't know anyone, like I wouldn't have had family to go to, um outside, and I didn't know anybody outside of the Scientology world at all. And also, like, you don't know. I was so aware that I knew, that I was so aware of my deficit that that terrified me. Like, being so acutely aware of the things that I didn't know, if you know what I mean, like, and knew that when I came out, I would be so underdeveloped that it would be embarrassing, and so it took me a while to like work up the bravery, even just on that. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
So this is how they keep you in this human trafficking environment. This is what they're doing to a person, particularly a child, is they're trying to keep them, or into anybody, but they're trying to keep them small. They're trying to keep them reduced so that they can continue to use them for their own purposes. So they're not going to educate you. They're not going to provide you with the means. They're going to keep your documents away from you, and they're going to either not pay you or not pay you enough to be able to do anything with it. And all these things were, what our experiences were.
Yeah, it definitely it makes you fearful of what you have going on. I had gone through, I'm still going through the list, the receipts that Liz Gale did, and I spreadsheeted
Mm-hmm.
all of the people on that list, plus all the new people, and then I put the crimes across all the different crimes that Scientology has been doing to all of the people and all the kids on this list. I'm only about halfway through. Um, but the child abuse crimes, the denial of education, the trafficking, all of that. And it's just amazing how many
Mm-hmm.
on that list is like, you might as well just check them all. It'd be easier to check everything and take the ones off that weren't, you know what I mean? The crimes that weren't, because there's so
Totally.
many crimes committed against so many kids. People. I shouldn't say kids, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Mm-hmm. And then I guess to put that into like how do you kind of transfer that into like practical use? Like, could you next to that actually list a place where that could be reported? Like, so when you've
Mhm.
identified a particular crime, like, okay, where could that be reported, and or which act specifically applies? Because as well, the other thing to consider is that if the act didn't exist at that time period that experience occurred, then the law, can't do anything. And that's why, like, when I focus on this forced labor, human trafficking law, which came into existence in 2000, and as of right now, they are still prosecuting acts which occurred from 2000 onwards. Yeah, so I guess I just it's like the that step of identifying which act at what time, how it applied, and then where that person could potentially support, and then how to get that information out to them. Yeah, or out to the even just broad
That would be
generally.
something that definitely somebody could do afterwards. Um, my role in doing that and my purpose of doing it was to get the statistical data of how many of the people that self-reported to Liz Gale were actually a victim of child abuse.
Mm-hmm.
How many were trafficked? How many thought of suicide? How many tried suicide? I mean, if you look at the
Oh,
list, this is where that staggering name came from, is just the are still with us. 22% of people on that list are not with us. That's huge.
wow.
That's huge. And rest in
Yeah.
peace to everybody on there. But 22% of Gail's list are no longer with us due to suicide or a tragedy. That's
Mm-hmm.
sobering.
Yeah, absolutely. Well,
And
it's
so
really
that's
an environment where there was no safeguards. Yeah, there was no safeguards for children. There was no advocacy. So, in that environment where there's nobody saying, hey, this isn't right, or if they do say that, they're just going to get steamrolled completely by the command. Like,
right.
this is like from the top down to the bottom, that had no regard for children, that did not treat them. In fact, is Hubbard's words to say that They are not a special type of human. They're, the same laws that apply to adults apply to children, in putting them on that equal setting with adults. And in fact, just even that, having that as like, as a part of policy, you can see just by that thing alone that you're going to create an environment that has absolutely, it just is unfettered ability to abuse children, unrestricted, and only could be restricted by governing bodies, law enforcement, but they were kept out. And this environment of abuse was kept shielded, particularly by this department called the Office of Special Affairs. So
Right.
that's like a kind of an important part of this topic too, because they're really the body that's in Scientology that works with lawyers, and they actively are like this barrier between government and law enforcement and what goes on in Scientology. And yeah, and so that's why I think, because I've been, you know, I think if you're talking about Scientology crimes, the Office of Special Affairs does come into the equation, because that's the function that it serves, is to protect Scientology from this kind of scrutiny.
It is.
Yeah.
Can I show you a picture that I drew? And I'm a
Yeah.
horrible drawer.
I,
I'm a
I didn't
horrible
know that
drawer.
you draw.
Well, no, I actually love to paint, but I don't because I'd get frustrated. But okay, so can you see that? It's an octopus with
Yes.
two heads.
You're really
With
good.
And that's David Miscavige
Yep.
and L. Ron Hubbard, and the kids behind the arms. And the arms, there's 8 arms, and they're all protecting the doctrine and the tech. And that's what L. Ron Hubbard and
Yeah.
David Miscavige, and then David Miscavige put in money and power. So there's doctrine and tech, money and power that's being behind those arms and being held behind those arms.
Yeah.
And so those are all the different arms of PR, OSA, free game or free fair gaming,
Mhm.
Sea Org, stuff like that. So,
Mhm.
but that's what's trapping the kids still in there, and that's what we need to do. Is we need to start taking away those arms, infiltration, government, the legal aspects. That picture of
Mhm.
that Scientology came to me the other day and went, oh, I want to try and draw it. And then Michael said I had to draw it. So, but
That's
but
no,
that's
that's
kind of
amazing.
representative.
And can you send me a photo? Yeah, can you send
Yeah,
me a photo of that, because I'd love to post it up. Because you're right, and seeing it in that way and seeing it as a structure is a better way to look at it. Because when we talk about like, oh, religion and belief and all that, none of that stuff's tangible. It's very like, it's yeah, you can't really kind of put your finger on it. But when you start looking at it as a structure that has certain functions, and looking at it in that way, like I love that what you said about like there's the doctrine, there's the ideas, but then there's also the actual structure that is protecting it and holding those things in place.
hmm
Because yeah, I think, Hubbard was not able to maintain, even though he had the Guardian's office, which had some of these functions. Um, it just wasn't. He was not able to hold up in terms of like how governments around the world were coming down on him, and he had to, go into seclusion and all this. But with Miscavige having a team, and the thing is with Miscavige is that, oh yes, he came into leadership, but it was very much like it was very much like this camaraderie um, of of people that were. It wasn't just David Miscavige, is what I want to say. Like when all that
right.
occurred, it was like I think people more felt like they were on a level playing field, that they each had their own division that they owned as their contribution towards Scientology. So whereas Mike Rinder was the commander of the Office of Special Affairs. Marty Rathbun was the commander of whatever he was doing. And
Right.
so I think was he the commander of the tech? I'm not sure. Anyhow, there was several people because it was more like a committee. It was like, you know what I mean? And so, but now it evolved into, you have Miscavige as the leader, but it is, I think it is, part of the story to understand how these things all came about. It's not because of one man. It's because of many people who did their part to enforce these walls, to create these structures, to occlude the government, health agencies, law enforcement from being able to have a look in, to threaten the media for having interest in it, all these sorts of things. And that takes many people. It's never one person, because it's
You're
a
right.
it's an organization, right? Yeah, it's a criminal
Hmm.
organization, and each person has their part to play in the criminal activity that they are either protecting or doing. And so yeah, and yeah, just wanted to add here, abuses of Scientology added, it was the executives, so the international executives, Rinder, Ray Midoff, etc., etc. There is quite a list of those people, and and then there's the ones that are still there today as well. Yeah.
Can I, so
So,
if there
what
are
did you?
any
Yeah.
under the radar people, I, I wanted, if somebody is thinking of the child labor laws and what they get paid and the volunteer ministers and religious volunteers, all of that. Do you know that if you, uh, it is reported that, like in the salary.com, if you go into Scientology's webpage for salary.com, it shows the what those jobs should be paying. Like the national average
Mm.
of a person that works for Scientology, of course they don't because they get $50 a week, but the average salary is approximately $243,000 per year of people that work for Scientology. Now
Mm-hmm.
they're using job codes and what should be the pay for job codes. Instead, you're getting $50. So if you're under the radar and you're not making an average salary of at least 80 to $100,000, dude, you need to leave. You're way underpaid. $50 a
Yeah.
week in your housing
Yeah.
isn't worth it. I just thought that
I
was
wanted to.
interesting.
So on that note, yeah. Just give me a moment because I want to just bring up this other case, child labor case, because what you just said then reminded me of it. So, sorry if you just give me a moment, and I'll do that.
I'm in no hurry. As long as chat doesn't mind, we don't mind. Thank you, AZ Crimson, for the gifted memberships. I appreciate it.
Okay, so this case, so this is again, this is under the U.S. Department of Labor, and this is in federal court. So this is in regards to FLDS, which is like the Fundamental Latter Days, whatever, Latter Day Saints.
Hmm.
Do you know what they're called? Um, anyhow,
That's the
FLDS. Okay.
it's the fundamental Mormons.
Oh, yeah, it says it here, Fundamentalist Church of Latter Day Saints. Okay, so this case was in Salt Lake City. A federal judge ordered Brian Jessup and Paragon Contractors Corp. To make an initial payment of $200,000 to compensate hundreds of children who were employed illegally and not paid for their labor on a pecan ranch between 2008 to 2013. Jessup and Paragon coordinated with the Fundamentalist Church of Latter-day Saints to use children and others in the church for field work. A multi-year investigation by the U.S. Department of Labor's Wage and Hour Division. See, remember we mentioned that one earlier, and so you can report there through the Wage and Hour Division, and they are responsible for things like child labor and of the Fair Labor Standards Act. And they revealed that the employers used underage workers illegally to harvest pecans by hand in southern Utah. So they were ordered to pay $200,000, but there was also then later on, they were also able to, I'm not sure if it's in this article, but
He was also convicted of SA and a few other things, and he's in jail. Warren Jeffs is in jail. He's basically running the FLDS from jail. They didn't lose their 501c3.
oh wow,
Mm-mm.
yeah. That is shocking.
So,
Okay, it says here for years we have successfully litigated numerous enforcement actions to investigate and put an end to the illegal use of child labor by Paragon and the FLDS Church, and to ensure that all workers are compensated in accordance with the law. And now they were able to bring later on they were able to bring significant they were able to bring penalties which created which was for a significant amount more, which was then accessible by these children who had been used as child labor, to then compensate them for the work that they did. So that's another thing as well to consider. And again, you can use this free helpline 866 for U.S. wage, and you can also file the complaint on the website as well. So it's the Wage and Hour Division under the Department of Labor is a particularly good one to go to report anything like this.
and there would still be no harm in grabbing my old video of the FBI for those that were in or for the never-ins. You can still make a claim, can still do it. So
Yeah,
I
yeah,
don't have
and
access to pull that, but but you can if you want to.
and so that's FBI under what? Like, so for what exactly? Do you want to just do a brief
There's
outline?
there's two reporting methods. One is for those that were in Scientology, and they can report to the FBI. And it's not the FBI, you're reporting to the Office of Inspector General that oversees the FBI. So you're complaining to the Department of Justice that the FBI did not protect you, that they didn't do their job, that they didn't protect you. And then the never ends, there's a letter listed for the never ends that they can report that the FBI didn't do their job to protect the survivors. So there's
Oh
two
wow.
different
Okay.
videos of that.
So okay, amazing. So is there a link, a particular link to the reporting methods?
Yep, there's a link, there's a
Or I can
letter
look it up under what
under mine. Just go to you can just go to
so
mine.
you said it was Department
It's Department of
go to your channel?
Justice,
Okay.
but it's the OIG. So if you go to my channel, there's two videos that has the letter.
Is it on a community post?
No, it's in my regular.
Under
Let me see
Scientology
if
crimes or
nope, under my Fat Grammy channel.
okay. And it's a video, is it?
There's two videos. Let me find the correct day. I don't have that many videos, so it's not. Um, if I'd have known we were going to be talking about it, I would have
We would have
pulled
prepared, but
links for you. I'm sorry.
we can add the links in the description. But I'm just wondering. So you said it was the Department of
It's the
which
Department of
department was it?
Justice, OIG, DOJ, OIG,
Office of the
and
Inspector General.
uh-huh.
Hmm.
And that is where you can find the place to report Serge and Nora and I did a live on it,
Okay.
and it's
Oh,
called
is this
emergency call to action,
okay?
and it's dated June 4th. So that is
All right.
the,
Cool.
let me find it here. Nora and Serge talk a lot.
Report. This has a thing here. Okay, so report fraud, waste, and abuse. If you know about waste, fraud, abuse, misconduct, or whistleblower retaliation within the Department of Justice, you may report it to the OIG hotline.
So you hit submit a complaint. We're not going to go
Yeah.
through it, but just hit submit a complaint. And then it'll give you a link to go to submit the complaint.
Okay, so you're talking about the failure of the department to protect the children, really, right? Is that what you're
Yes.
saying?
So you're complaining against saying that the FBI did not protect the children. And as I said, I've got a letter on that other one that a word for word letter. I think that is in the post. Um, but so you go through
I
and
think I've
you're
shared
just,
it. I think I shared it as well.
I
So
think
yeah,
you
I
did,
know what
yeah.
you're talking about. Yeah. So what to report? Yeah. So you can report through this website. Basically, in regards to yeah, so where the government basically did not intervene, specifically the FBI did not intervene to protect the children and what they were experiencing. So I think that's a really good one to do. So that's the U.S. Department of Justice under the Office of the Inspector General. That's
Right.
yeah, that'd
And
be
that's
pretty cool.
basically, as I said, you're not, because you guys, under the arbitration clause that you supposedly signed when you left, you're not supposed to be complaining and you're not allowed to be complaining because of the arbitration. But you never said you wouldn't complain about the FBI.
Right. That's a good
Little
point. Yeah. And
semantics.
I'm not even sure. And I think like the arbitration thing that came in later, so I don't even think I mean I certainly don't recall signing an arbitration agreement. Um, yeah, so yeah.
But you're
But I think also there's things, yeah, like an arbitration agreement should not exclude reporting of criminal acts, right?
correct.
Yeah. So no kind of agreement really um should prevent law. It cannot supersede law. So always the law is the thing that is the black and white overreaching, and so that's in when you're talking about. But then let's talk about that. well, we won't get into it, but some of the conversations around like, so criminal versus civil, then there are two different things there, because there is
Right.
so arbitration, bringing in this requiring arbitration agreement in civil court has been successfully argued by Scientology, requiring a person to be subjected to that, which is absolutely horrific. And we have that in the Valerie Haney case. And actually that's a case that really deserves a deep dive in itself. But it's just absolutely horrific. But that's a civil matter. And so when we're talking about bringing an investigation by a federal body, I think there's so much more. It's so much more. The power is broader. The application is broader. The time frames are broader. And that's where I think that on a larger scale, we can be effective, and there is validity in filing those reports on that federal level, particularly with regards to forced labor, human trafficking. Yeah.
So, and that was at the very beginning of my journey with all of this information. And so I think I probably would even revamp that letter to make it a little bit better now that I know more. But that was my first rodeo with trying to figure all of this out and trying to figure out where arbitration
Mm-hmm.
um, fell into it all. And so,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we had, I think, gosh, 100 letters go in. No, there was 50 some survivors that sent letters in, and I think there were over 100 never ends. I mean, there was a lot of attention to it at the time. So, doesn't hurt
Mm-hmm.
to redo it, especially after the UNOI.
It absolutely doesn't hurt. Absolutely. So that case is so significant. That case really was the that kind of put the pep in my step kind of thing. Like it was like, oh, this can actually happen. Like we could see this same, because like reading through it and just seeing, I'm like, oh yeah, that happened to me. Yeah, I experienced that. I experienced that. And knowing that others, had experienced it as well. It's like, yeah, there's a case there. There's no denying that.
Oh, yeah.
But we have to start with the foundation of encouraging people to report. And I think it has to be repetitive, and it requires a lot of patience and gentle reminding and that sort of thing, and pointing people towards trying to make the process as easy as possible, which is why I appreciate you having put together what you were just talking about and maybe looking at that again. But really, it's like trying to make it easy as possible, because we know that when people have experienced trauma, it is difficult to report on things. It is difficult to go back and look at the details of it. And so, yeah, I
Yeah.
think there is a lot of value in being repetitive about some of these things to hopefully get it through, because you never know who that information is going to be taken up by, and then how they will then pass it on to another person, and maybe that person will pass it on to another person, and that really generates the creating this atmosphere that we want of encouraging reporting.
Yeah. D, right up above that, a few days later, I put together a video. It's called Never Ends, It's Your Time to Shine. So that way you could file the OIG against the FBI also. And so it's got a letter that is focused just on Never Ends reporting, to use that word. People that weren't in Scientology.
Awesome. That's so good. Excuse me. Amanda says she loves the gentle part, and I really do think that that's part of it. And just we just have to remember, like, we're all humans. Life's difficult. Life apart from the Scientology thing is hard anyway. It's just regular normal living is hard. So the easier we can make things, and the more supportive and informative we can be, I think is going to be the way to move forward. Oh, I like this. Because it is all over the world, you could send it to the United Nations for their crimes. Yeah, I mean, this is something that I would love to see. So, the United Nations have got a charter, which is it's on the rights of the child. And all countries around the world, I think it was created in 1989. Australia ratified it in 1990, which means that they accepted it as their own, taking on board that they recognize that those are rights for children across Australia. And all around the world, every country has taken in those set of rights for children except for the United States. So, but absolutely, it should be something that we push for in all other countries, because it is applicable. And in the rights of the child, it's all about what is in the best interest of the child, so like for their development, for their
Hmm.
well-being, for their health. And and it all comes back to that. It all comes back to that. And so um yeah, I think there is something to be done like that. It should be addressed by the United Nations to have a look at, like, okay, or why are we allowing children to be interrogated, held in rooms, like, and all of this that has happened. So yeah, absolutely. I think if we can try and get something forward in the United Nations, I don't know how to do that, but that would definitely be an avenue that I'd love to explore for sure.
Thank you,
Um,
Amanda. Thank you for that.
okay. And that's that. Yeah, that's that. Thing
So
with it
Dee
as
asked
well.
if, or
Yeah.
Wise Mama asked, did the
Um,
OIG ever respond? And the OIG is like most even local OIGs or state OIGs. They take the information and they make their claim or they make their case, and you never hear back from them on it because it becomes an internal investigation.
yeah. Yeah. Now, if it's your own, okay, maybe that's specific for that department. But if it's for under other departments and you've put in your own like personal complaint, like for example, if it's human trafficking or if it's child
That's
labor,
different.
then you should receive a response back. Yeah, and they
That's
have
different.
like time frame requirements of like they have to follow up. Yeah, yeah, that's a different thing. They basically, when you fill out this online form, it becomes registered in their system as a thing that needs to be followed up on, and they have to touch base with you and talk about that and find out the greater details, and then decide where that report's going to go and what's going to happen with it. And
Yeah.
yeah. Um, okay, well, it's been so lovely to chat about these things. And is there anything that you wanted to add, Mona?
No, I really appreciate the fact that we can talk about this. When we get done though, I have to bend your ear on something, so don't, because we've got
Yeah,
further
perfect.
information that I need to talk to you about. But yes, I
Yeah.
appreciate the fact that you have me on and we can talk about it. And I'm sorry that I kind of lambasted you with more information than what you thought that you were gonna like do, and I'm like, oh well, there's way more to it. So I should have prepped you a little bit better. I'm sorry.
No, and that's the thing. No, no, it's great. It's great. So that's the thing, and sometimes I get a little bit scattered because I'm like, I try and do too much information. It's like when you're going to like present information, it has to be organized so that people understand it. And sometimes I just go, and so it's good because like I what happened is I mentioned a couple things, and then Mona was like, well, actually, and so it's good because then I could reframe that or like reposition that, because at the end of the day, this all has to have practical use. Do you know what I mean? Like for me, it's like there's no point in just
Hmm.
talking about something if we can't,
Hmm.
like I will ideally I would like to see like where we could use certain things. And so if there's something that I'm
Hmm.
like, oh, we could do this, and then it's like, no, that's not actually a thing, then please let me know, because I don't want to spend my
So
time like running that thing and then yeah, you know what I mean?
that's the way I am too. It's the so what now? So what now? A couple of things I took away from what we were talking about. One is possible legislation about the volunteer information. Maybe it's state or local that you
Mm.
could try first, or federal. I mean, who do we know? Just
Mm-hmm.
that's a big takeaway. Not that I really want to start it this weekend,
Mm-hmm.
but you know what I mean. That's something that's a takeaway. So what now? What does that
Yeah.
mean? What does any of
Mm-hmm.
this mean? So maybe the chats can start saying, "Hey, you know what? I heard that what you went through was really child abuse or a violation of labor laws, child labor laws. You might want to consider looking into that, doing the gentle nudge to people to let them know." That's another so now what that I took away.
Totally. Yeah, I love that. That's definitely something I want to underscore because, sometimes we even can give, like, as in the survivors that grew up in it, we even can give false information, even because we have our own blind spots or because someone told us something and then we believed that to be true. So that's why it is really helpful, like, um, for other people to say, well, no, actually, well, this law was in place at that time period that you're talking about. Da da da. That was a violation. Here is a link for where you can report it to, and that's helpful. And then we can go, oh, well, the thing that Joe told me, 5 years ago. Oh, maybe that actually wasn't a thing. Like maybe that's the thing that's been stopping me from seeing what could be done.
Right.
And I think that you're giving someone empowerment because you're saying no, actually you can do something about it. It's not a lost cause, and there are things that absolutely we could genuinely and effectively pursue. And yeah, so I think also I wanted to say, Mona, is that I feel like this isn't like the end of this conversation. I feel like this is a conversation
Mm-mm.
that I would like to have and I would love to have with you, at the kind of again
Love
and
that.
again. And I don't want to like make you commit to something that's like, but like I just see it has so much value to come back to this conversation, come back to it, expand on it, bring things in. I know there's so many things that we're just not able to cover in this time frame, but in terms of like human trafficking and forced labor, there's actually several places where that can be reported across a number of departments
Hmm.
across the US and agencies. And so that would be good even just to do a live, just to talk, just purely just to focus on that.
I would
But I
love
guess
that.
what we decided was like, yeah, like when Mona and I were chatting, we just sort of decided to like kind of find like a starting point. Like, okay, well, if we lay this out, it's going to start the foundation and the groundwork. And then, you know what I mean? And then that way, I feel like it's the beginning of a conversation. Yeah.
Where do we go from here? That's right.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. I'll just pop this
Thank you
up.
so much,
So
chat. I'm
thank
sorry that I
you.
wasn't in my chat really well, but thank you for understanding. I'm glad the chats were linked.
Oh, beautiful. Yeah, awesome. And I know that you have a lot of people there in your chat who have been following along with you, and they really understand like how persistent and how diligent you've been in looking into these things. So I just want to say that like I appreciate that so much, and I'm sure that you're widely respected, and that people can see the work that you've done. It's really important. This
My
one's
heart
from
really goes
Adrian.
out.
So thank you both, Mirriam and Mona. I've
Thank
learned
you.
more about what. Yeah, I've learned more about what I can do myself to hopefully help with this fight against the crimes committed in Scientology. That's awesome because that's what we want. We want people to feel like there is something that they can do. I think
Hmm.
that's so Dee said, oh, thank you, ladies in chat, for all this information. I get scattered too, Miriam, so that's why I really want to know the exact things us never-ins can do to make a difference. And also just on that point too, it's like maybe so like let's say in this discussion, maybe there was some points that we didn't make as clear as we could have, and then maybe in the next conversation, if that's a particular point of interest, like
Hmm.
going into that, like so that's why I think like just coming back to it because you just never know how that's going to sink in with someone in a different way if it's made more clear, or you know what I mean, because it can be, information can be like overloading too. And also as
Hmm.
well, like particularly like in the trauma space too, we're joined by a lot of people who have had their own experiences with trauma, particularly child trauma. I think in situations where you feel overwhelmed and disempowered, I think there's so much relatability, and that's where I think a lot of people join in the fight with us. And one of the things that we are battling kind of simultaneously all together is like our own traumas, and that, and how that affects us. Like, so for example, it can make, maybe we can only do things in like little spurts or whatever, or like the way that we operate or the way that we take in information. Maybe our trauma has caused ADHD, or it's, and that scattered tendency of like you know what I mean, or like overload, like trying to put too much in, because that's another way I go as well. Just, you know what I mean? So yeah, so I think that's where it's like repetition is, I think, is just going to be like my mantra for the year, and hopefully get that message out. Yeah.
Can I say one personal thing before we leave, though?
Um,
Do you mind? If we could
yeah,
all keep
absolutely.
our thoughts
Yeah.
in good vibes and prayers for Cece, because she's still in the hospital. Cece Smith, Cece, the one that, the,
Yes.
yeah, so she's still in the hospital, and I've been keeping track of
CC
her. And
Creechko. Yeah.
yeah, Smith. Yep. Yes.
Okay, good. Okay, good. Yeah, absolutely. So Cece is someone that came into Scientology as a young person, and she ended up having like children within Scientology. She was in the Sea organization in Los Angeles for many years, and she's someone that, like, I grew up with her kids. I saw her around as I was growing up, and she has made her way out of Scientology, which has been like a long journey for her of, even after she left the Sea organization, but still held on to Hubbard's words and the Scientology practices, and still believing in them and using them in her own life, and then sort of moving on from there to like work out like, okay, this doesn't work for me, and that sort of thing. So she's had this massive journey. I have some videos that I've done with her. I did a big recording and broke it down
Mhm.
into smaller videos on my channel. So her story is really important, because where she then turned to after that was that she wanted to report these crimes, and she wanted to contribute to justice for the children and what had happened. And she was working on that, and unfortunately her health has deteriorated. And I did message her. She said that she was going okay, so I don't know, that sounds promising. But I appreciate you mentioning that, Mona, and we can definitely, yeah, send her our support if we can, and just, yeah, see what happens. Yeah.
Yep. Thank you.
Yeah. Or yeah. Thank you, Stacy, and thank you, Dee. Yeah, thank you, T, as well. Beautiful, sending flowers. Um, yeah, thank you guys so much. All right. Well, we'll end the stream. You and I will have a little catch up afterwards.
Yep.
And yeah, again, just want to say appreciate everyone for taking the time with us and being here with us. And yeah, we're gonna just keep going. And we'll talk to you all soon.
Thank you so much, chat.
Bye.
Thanks. We'll see you in the morning.